Hey, I'm Colin. This is Creative Mornings Nashville. This is Vivek Surti. Really excited to have him speak today on the topic of roots. Vivek, where are you from, man?
Born in Manchester, Tennessee. Grew up here in Nashville.
Manchester, Tennessee.
Home of Bonnaroo.
You look just like everyone else from Manchester. If you all will help me, all we have left to do is give Vivek a warm welcome to the stage. Come on up.
I know, my sister told me to do it. I was like, roots. What? First, just want to say thanks to Colin, whole Creative Mornings team. It's like sometimes you get asked to do these things, and the Creative Morning team is just an amazing one to work with, because it's one of those things that you really don't have to worry about anything. And I remember on Monday, Colin and I actually came into the restaurant on Sunday. We drank some bubbly wine. It was great. And then Monday we had lunch, and he was like, just talk about what you want to do. And so I was like, made a little outline, sent it to him. He was like, well, don't talk about all of this stuff. Just, try to hit these four. And he's like, we'll be great. But it's like, even the team here just coming in early and working with them. Thank you guys so much for all that you do, and all that you do for free. Somebody should pay you for it. My name is Vivek, as Colin said. Own a restaurant called Taylor. And before I really started off, just kind of wanted to gauge the audience a little bit. So, one, has anybody been to Taylor? Oh yeah, nice. How many of you are confused and think I'm talking about 5th and Taylor? Great, yeah. How many people here identify as American? How many of those people identify as first-generation American? All right, got a couple. Any Indian Americans? Nice, hi. Are you Gujarati? Are you Gujarati? No. Okay. If anybody wants to learn a nice Gujarati word for the day, I'll say "kem cho," which means hello. And you can always respond with "maja macho," and you got to shake your head a little bit when you say it. But "maja macho" means it's going good. How many people have been to an Indian restaurant? Nice. How many of you order a dish called chicken tikka masala? Won't say it, we'll save that for the end. How many people say that traveling is one of their greatest passions? How many people have been to India? How many people have been to Gujarat? Nobody. Interesting. I don't have anything to really tell you guys on what to do. But what I'm going to do is just share my story a little bit. Talk about where I came from, growing up here in Nashville, where we started, where we are today. And hopefully from that, can just showcase some lessons that if you can take something with you, great. If you can't, hopefully we can become friends. And the next time you see me out somewhere, you'll say, "Kem cho," and then I'll respond with, "Maja macho." So my family is from Gujarat, India. Most people are actually familiar with the place, even though nobody's been. If you've ever met anybody with the last name Patel, Gujarati. Anybody has ever heard of Mahatma Gandhi? Gujarati. If anybody knows the current Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, also Gujarati. Right. It's a land that most people are only 1 degree of separation from. And it's the westernmost state in India. It's in the middle of the country. And according to my sister's 23andMe, we are 100% Indian from Gujarat, whole family. All of my family members were tailors by profession. We come from, they call it dergies, is the translation. Dergi means tailor. And a lot of people in our family are all around the tailoring business. So whether that is somebody who's an actual tailor, somebody who sells textiles, or people who sell sewing machines and do maintenance on them. Kind of all those tasks are encapsulated in the word tailor. My dad moved to the United States in 1972. All of his generation decided not to be tailors. And so my dad's an engineer, and he got a job in Manchester, Tennessee, small town, 1978, moved there. Him and my mom got married in 1980, and then in 1985, your boy was born. It's a great year. And I was very lucky to grow up in an amazing household. We lived with my dad's parents, my paternal grandparents, and then my sister was born a few years after me. And I could not have been luckier as a kid. We grew up in Manchester until I was 5, and every day was just filled with love. We had breakfast together, lunch together, dinner was homemade by my grandmother and my mom every day. We shared a lot of great experiences. We would travel together and go to Atlanta. We'd go visit my aunts, and really just grew up learning from them, hanging out, having a lot of family time. And it was growing up in a very rich culture. India is one of those cultures that existed for centuries. And so growing up, I remember every morning my room was always right next to my grandparents. So my grandfather would wake up at 5:30 in the morning, and he'd come over and wake me up. And we would pray together. And my grandfather, being a tailor, also made all of my clothes. So him and I were matching for 4 years straight. And so we'd sit down and we'd do those things. And then we'd have things that we do in the afternoon. And then we'd have other prayers that we'd say at the end of the night as well. We would go to many cultural ceremonies. So we'd celebrate Diwali, which is the Hindu New Year and the Festival of Lights. My dad helped plan an event back in the 90s called the Cultural Festival of India, where they brought together people from India and people here from Nashville and did an entire festival for a weekend. We got to travel back to India every other year to visit my mom's side of the family, my mom's parents, her brothers, my cousins over there. And I grew up speaking Gujarati, didn't speak English. Until I was 5 years old, we moved to Nashville, and I started going to school at Una Elementary. Una Bears, if anybody went there. And going to school was a different type of experience for me. When you grow up in a family that's so rich in their culture and that really tries to impart that culture onto you, it's all I had ever known. And so going to school, the first problem was I didn't know how to communicate with anybody. So if I needed a glass of milk, if I needed to use the restroom, if I wanted to go out and play, my mom had to actually write a sheet of things for my teacher, so that way she would understand what I was asking for. And immediately when you go into school and then you start going through kindergarten, first grade, second grade, for me, I started experiencing a lot of identity issues. Part of that was being in school, and sometimes I still get these questions to this day, but it's a lot of stuff like people ask, well, do you speak Indian? I said, no, it's not a language. I speak Gujarati. They're like, well, what's that? A lot of people ask, where do you go for Indian food? Nowhere. Because chicken tikka masala is not Indian. I get a lot of, are you going to be reincarnated as a rat? I was like, no, it's not how it works. My favorite one, are you going to have an arranged marriage? I was like, no, this is not the 15th century. And to this day, there's still all these questions that start happening. But it's questions that you face almost every time you meet somebody. As a kid, I grew up doing a lot of things that I think are traditionally American. So I'd go to school, right? We'd go through all the classes, right? English, math, European history, geography. I would play basketball. So that was my greatest passion growing up. I, in high school, started doing policy debate, which was one of my favorite things that I ever did. At the same time, we were also doing things that were Indian activities. And so every Friday, Saturday, usually one of my friends' parents would throw a little dinner party. And in the Indian culture, we always call our parents' friends uncle and auntie. Because every person that actually has a relation to you has a specific name, right? So my mom's brother is always called mama. His wife is called mami. So just by nature of those words, you know what the relation is. But for someone you're not related to, really what you do is you just call them uncle and auntie. So if you guys ever go to India, and you need to ask somebody a question, just be like, hey, uncle, where's the closest bar? And those dinners were so much fun to me because usually all the parents would go in one room, all the kids would go in one room, and we'd be outside and we'd play basketball for a little bit, or we'd come in and we'd play Super Mario Kart, or we'd play ping pong. And it was where we really learned to socialize. And it wasn't so much about the food that we were eating as it was about the relationships you were building. Right? How was your week at school? How's basketball practice going? Where are you guys going on vacation this summer? Where are you going for spring break? And as we're doing that, my life was really torn between the two. Because you're living in America, you are an American, but at the same time, people don't treat you like one. Right? You're always Indian to them. And then when you go to India, they recognize you immediately. These are the Americans. And usually in India too, during the winter months when it's temperate climate, they call it NRI season, which is non-resident Indian. And so it's like they know. So that was one of those issues that I just grew up with, and something that always stays a little bit in my mind. And I was in limbo for a while. Still am. But being first generation, I think it's also important to know that within yourself, you also have something that no one else has. This exposure to two great, amazing cultures. My parents, whenever they asked me what I wanted to be, there were only 3 answers available. Right? And if you grow up in an Indian household, it's only 3. So you better be a doctor, you better be a lawyer, or you better be an engineer. Right? I am none of those things. But because I did policy debate, I wanted to be a lawyer. Thought it'd be cool. So I got a degree in political science, worked on local and national political campaigns, worked in a lawyer's office, and then realized I never want to be a lawyer. And moved to DC for a short time right after college before coming back home. When I came back home, I didn't really have a job. So I was like, okay, what can I spend my time doing? So around this time, it's 2010, there was a startup company called Twitter. There was a blogging platform called Blogger, if anybody remembers that. And I thought it could be fun to write about food. I had never worked in a professional kitchen. I just enjoyed cooking at home. And really, most of my spare time was spent watching the Food Network. And so I said, well, I have some recipes. I can probably write those up there, put it up. So I started doing that. And slowly, started to gain a little traction. And through Twitter, met other food bloggers that were in Nashville. We did this revolutionary thing, which was called a meetup. Right? Y'all remember those? And we all got together and hung out at this olive oil store in the culinary mecca, which is Cool Springs. And while we were there, it was a great way to build relationships with people that were also interested in food. While I kept blogging, I started running into a wall. Couldn't write recipes anymore. Hated recipes. Recipes aren't a part of Indian culture. Cookbooks aren't a part of it. And for me, I didn't feel like I was getting enough out of it. So then I thought, well, if I really want to connect people, and I want to cook for people, learn more about them, learn more about the community that we're in, how about instead of blogging, we make this into an experience? So we launched a supper club, which was Nashville's first pop-up restaurant back in 2011. And the idea being that we would do one dinner a month, and we would invite all these local farmers out there, that we'd get produce from them, that we would have them sit at the table, and between each course, we'd share our stories and inspirations for the dishes that we created. I did it at my parents' house. Luckily, my parents let me do it. And I realized I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like, man, I should probably learn. But then one day I was over at the Nashville Farmers Market, And this is post-flood, right? So the farmer's market flooded post-flood. And they built a little kitchen in the middle of the farmer's market called the Grow Local Kitchen. And if you guys have been to the farmer's market, you've probably seen it. There's now a lot of pop-ups that usually operate out of there. And my friend Laura Wilson, who was running it at the time, she was having lunch at the same time. She said, "Mind if I join you?" I said, "Hey, Laura, that'd be great." So we sat down and just started talking. She had just had a son. His name's Porter. He's awesome. Laura works at Citizen Kitchen now, down at Hunter Station in East Nashville. So if you ever see your son running around Porter, challenge him to a push-up contest. He's really good. And so Laura was like, "Well, why don't we hang out and talk?" I was like, "Great." So she asked me a lot about what I was doing, and I was like, I'm looking for jobs in the political space, but I'm also doing this little pop-up thing. And she was like, "Well, why don't you do the pop-up here?" And I said, "Well, that's kind of cool. Can you help?" Because I had no idea what I was doing, like I said. And so starting in 2011, we started doing it at the farmer's market, at a restaurant that doesn't exist anymore, but it was called AM at FM. And we would set 25 people up. We'd do 5 courses. We'd do cocktail pairings with it. And in between each course, we'd come out and talk about every dish and every drink that we were making and why we put them together. And that's kind of how this all started. At the same time, a lot of people asked me if I wanted to do a restaurant. And I said, absolutely not. No chance. So I went to work at the Tennessee Business Roundtable for a little bit. It was fun. And then it wasn't. Then I started working at the Nashville Wine Auction, where I got to drink some of the world's greatest wines. That was a lot of fun. But the job wasn't. And a couple of years ago, I started thinking about next steps. Do I keep working for somebody else? Or do I work for myself? And at the time, the Supper Club had been going on for a little bit, but I was like, okay, what can we do? What are things that I could do? And I was like, well, I could cook. Or I worked in PR at the National Wine Auction. I was like, maybe I can do some PR stuff. So I was lucky enough to be surrounded by some great friends that pushed me. And my friend Caroline Galzin at Nikki's, she gave me a call. She said, "Hey, I think you need to talk to our real estate person." I said, "Okay, sounds great." So I set up a meeting with them, and we started looking at properties. And then I started understanding what the deals meant. And a lot of restaurants in town, they try to sign you on these deals, which are 10-year leases with personal guarantees, $1.5 million build-outs. And I'm doing the math, and I'm like, man, this is not good. And I think sometimes, a lot of restaurants, why they don't do well is sometimes the deal, start off at the beginning. So then that reinforced my belief, which is that I never want to open a restaurant. I'm not going to do it. So started thinking about doing my own PR firm. And a couple of weeks later, I got a call from some landlords, friends of mine, who owned the building that Kuchny and Keller was in. And so Kuchny and Keller was a restaurant that was at 1300 3rd Avenue in Germantown, 3rd and Monroe. And unfortunately, only lasted about 8 months. And so when it closed, they had people that were going to take it over, but they didn't want the bottom dining room. So then my friend was like, "I think this is a good deal for you to take." He's like, "It's a built-out space. It's ready to go." He's like, "If you're ready, this is the space to do it in." So I said, "Cool, let's do it." This is August 2018. Then we had to come up with what the idea was. And at the time, when you're doing restaurants, everybody tells you what to do, right? They're like, you got to be open for lunch, you got to be open for dinner, you got to go to-go food. They're trying to maximize revenue and all these things. And once I ran the numbers on that, I was like, man, it's not something I can do. And so then I tried to remember where I came from. And the best dinners I ever had, the food never really mattered. It was all about the people that were in the room. And that's who I got to see every Friday and Saturday as a kid. So I got to see every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday with my family. And so when we started thinking of the name, my sister lobbied very hard for it to be named after her. Her name's Zerna. I need to say that because this is being filmed. And if she sees this video and I don't mention her, she's going to be very upset. So Zerna, it's for you. And so then I told her that we're not going to name the restaurant after you. We're going to name it Taylor, using the family name. And once we chose that name, we figured out what the concept was going to be. Taylor should be my last name. It's my grandfather's name. And he changed my dad's name when my dad started going to school to Surti. Surti means you are somebody who comes from the town Surat, which was the biggest city in the district that we lived in Gujarat. And so part of the restaurant is reclaiming that name. At the same time, it focused us on what food we were going to serve. If we were going to call it after the family name, we couldn't just create everything or do different things. We had to do dishes that were important to us. And the first dish that I knew was going to go on the menu was a dish called dar bhat, which is lentils and rice. And it's what we ate 5 out of 7 nights growing up. There's a recipe card for it outside. And whereas most people think chicken tikka masala is Indian food, it's actually dar bhat, which is the food that Indians eat at home almost every single day. It transformed the ethos of what the business was going to be. My grandmother always taught me that the most important thing was to take care of your people and treat them like family. And so we made sure to say that to us in our business, the most important thing is our staff. We also talked about our ethos of hospitality, that the most important thing is the experience of a guest. The second most important thing is service. And the third most important thing is food. You'll always go back to a restaurant where you had okay food, but you had a great time. But if you had the world's best food and you feel that you were treated badly, you're never going to come back. At the same time, we also wanted to build a community of local farmers and artisans and people that we support. Not just people in our community, but also people that we think are just doing the right things. For example, there's a friend of mine who owns a spice company where she is sourcing single origin spices from India and paying the workers twice the fair trade wage. That we have the ability to support people like that. And throughout it all, I learned how to say no to people that said I should be open for brunch, for lunch, open more than 4 days a week. To stick to our guns because our roots told us what we should do. The why of Taylor was first and foremost selfish too. The reason why we did it was, one, because I wanted to connect with our culture. My parents' generation learned an incredible amount from my grandparents. But being first generation, we're people that are torn between two cultures. Sometimes you have people trying to choose one over the other. And certainly that happened in my life too. There's times when I would say, yes, I was definitely more Indian. There are also times where I would say I was definitely more American. But at the same time, how do we try to understand what they can be together? And I went to a funeral for one of my grandfather's sisters. And she used to make this incredible bread called bhakri. And during her funeral, somebody was like, hey, does anybody know how to make that bhakri? And no one knew. It's a tradition that's lost. But yet they knew so much about that generation. Our generation knows nothing about the food that we grew up on because we just take for granted that our parents will make it for us, right? Or we pursue businesses that sometimes lead us away. For example, you saw a couple of years ago how so many people wanted to open up a fast casual Indian restaurant. Become the Chipotle of Indian food. Take chicken tikka masala, wrap it in naan, put some sauces on it, call it a day, right? 36 different concepts. None of them have scaled. They went away from their roots. My parents still tell me every day, and really definitely every birthday, that not only am I getting blessings from them, that I'm getting blessings from all of my grandparents and ancestors. Selfishly, I wanted to learn. How do we keep a hold of these things that we're far away from? Even though we didn't grow up in India, doesn't mean that we can't carry on those traditions. At the same time, we wanted to share what we had. India, in my opinion, is the most misunderstood food culture in the world. People think about it as curry and tikka masala, neither of which are Indian, right? It's just British. India is the most geographically diverse country in the world. You can be high up and cold in the Himalayan mountains. You can be down on a tropical beach. You can be in the desert. You can be in the swamp. It is a culture that has centuries of history and traditions, and such an important place in the world. and is the precursor to a lot of things. I think American Southern food, comes from India. And yet, it's 1.6 billion people. And the entire cuisine is just looked at as a monolith of curry, which is a word that doesn't exist in 29 languages across the country. And so part of what we want to do is share where we came from. Not necessarily to change people's perception of what India is, or hoping that you'll never eat chicken tikka masala again. But it's to say that this is where we come from. And for me personally, the more I look at Gujarati food, and the more I look at Gujarat, the more similarities I see between it and the American South. That it is a place where hospitality reigns supreme, where people invite you into their homes, and they break their backs to make sure you have a great time, where people will do anything to help you, and where people want to feed you with love and support and care. And when I look at it more, we are so much more similar than we are different. There are times when you're doing a business where you think too much in your head, or people get into your head, and they tell you, hey, you should do this. Trust me. I've been doing it a long time. Trust me. I assume a lot of people that have started business have gotten that. It's like, just trust me. I've been doing this. I'll tell you what you should do. But sometimes we have to do what's right for us. And at Taylor, I really stopped thinking with my head a little bit and started thinking more from the heart. We are creative because of our roots. And it's that strength of growing up in two different cultures that allowed this concept to happen. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. And the roots that dig deep show us so much more about our culture, our traditions, our rituals. And I think that whatever you do in life, it doesn't matter if it's a business, if it's a side gig, if it's a side hustle, if it's your current project, or if it's travel plans. Sometimes you're going to try to find times where it's like you won't know the answer to everything. But where you can always look is where you came from. And you can always look at your roots. And you can look at the people that helped you along the way, the people that you grew up with. And through it, I think you'll find some inner strength and some direction that'll hopefully help you along the way. So thank you guys for having me tonight. Oh, this morning, when you have a restaurant, it's like,